In this session of our time talking about different paradigms of church planting, I'm joined with a dear brother in Christ, Ed Kang, who has for a number of years been working in just a wonderful ministry that started at Berkeley, if I remember correctly, and has spread across the different campuses in the United States, university campuses, and different places around the world. So Ed is joining us to share a little bit about his experience and both in ministry and in his Christian experience. So Ed, thanks so much for being with us in our class.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Michael. Thanks for having me on to share my story.
Yeah, well, I'm excited about that story because it really is, I think, and I'm not saying this because I like you, Ed, but because I really see the Lord doing something in the work that He's put your hand to, and grateful for what we might be able to learn from that. But I thought before we start, as we're starting here, I'd love to hear, and I'd love for our students to hear a little bit about your story. Tell us a little bit about your Christian experience.
uh, I grew up not going to church until my teenage years. I was Korean American immigrant family in LA, and in the 70s and 80s, I was sort of veering toward kind of delinquency, and I was caught by a very cool man with a guitar. Back then, that was like the early worship wars, I guess. And
Okay.
he gathered together a bunch of people, a bunch of high schoolers, English speaking, but nobody was ministering to the second generation of the immigrant population. I was sort of the early part of that in the 70s, and invited a bunch of us to a Saturday morning Bible study. And for some reason, I started attending, and he was a fired up postman who worked graveyard shift and had time during the day. And he got a bunch of us high schoolers together and poured into us. And I remember studying the Gospel of John from chapter 1 to chapter 6, from March to August, and then August 15th, 1979, went up to a little cabin in Big Bear, which is a little mountain in Southern California, and we had a retreat and had a pretty powerful conversion experience there.
Wow.
And then I came back to campus and quickly got the nickname Pastor Ed because I would print out my own flyers, go to the library or the post office to Xerox them on the waxy thermal paper, if you remember, and started flyering on campus for a Bible study that I started, and then I came to Berkeley as a college student and just continued to gather my peers and pretty soon younger ones, and then I discovered that the immigrant church had no idea what to do with the second generation, and so that was my calling into ministry was very specific like that. It was a real niche, and I looked at the second generation Korean American in these Korean immigrant churches, and the immigrant churches, the first generation, were vibrant with passionate prayer life, but the kids were completely neglected. And so I just happened to be at that age and generation where I could speak English, and I was bicultural, and so I took that on at a local church, and that jump-started, I think, my passion for preaching the gospel and discipling people. So I went on to law school and practiced law for about 3 years, but that joy of pouring into people and having people in my home and discipling them never left me. And so after 3 years of working at a law firm, I decided, wait, I can leave this desk and plenty of other lawyers can take my place, but the real need is for someone like me to take on this next generation of English speaking Asian Americans by that time. And so that was sort of my sense of calling. It wasn't a mystical, voice. It was more like a very, very dire need that I looked around and I saw that I was, more or less uniquely, me and a handful of other people like me had to step into it. So that's a little bit of my early journey into ministry.
Yeah, neat, neat. What a great story about how someone just took the time to meet with you and kind of disciple you through a Bible
Yeah.
study. And then, boy, we're just a couple days after the anniversary of your conversion to the Lord.
Hmm.
So how neat is that? Great. Well, you stepped into ministry uh, after attending law school and practicing law. That you stepped more into full time ministry. What did that look like for you?
Um, well, because I've been involved in collegiate ministry, just like Campus Crusade or InterVarsity, we have to be self-funded. But because we're a local church, so I found myself at a church at UC Berkeley, or like right near UC Berkeley, reaching out to Berkeley students. And because we're a local church, it wasn't very appropriate to raise funds for ourselves. So we weren't a parachurch. We behaved like a parachurch. And so the shift from full time work to full time ministry was really rather smooth because we were a bunch of bivocational ministers anyway. And my salary when I became first full time was $200 a month. Um, my wife was an engineer, so she, we lived off of her income. But almost everybody at our church still, we're a pretty big scale operation, but it's mostly run by bivocational ministers who have their day jobs and then consider their calling to ministry just as important.
Yeah, yeah, great. And that's one of the unique things I think that we see in the work that you've done is the number of the folks that are doing this bivocationally. In fact, I can remember when I was out there visiting with you all. Gosh, it's been over a year and a half now.
Mhm.
Walking into your worship center and realizing that everybody sitting in there was involved in some capacity in full time
Mhm.
ministry or in ministry of some sort. And I really
Mhm.
appreciate that about the work that you all are doing. And tell us a little bit about that work. You do have kind of a niche here that you're working with. It's almost as if it's the marriage of the church and the parachurch at some level, and it's really working for you all. Tell us a little bit about how you conceptualize that and what ministry is looking like.
I think in an attempt to explain our church, I've realized that this is really the shortcut to understanding what we're like. We're almost just like uh, Crew, Campus Crusade for Christ. Um, we're very similar to any um, evangelism and discipleship oriented um, college parachurch group. We go onto campus. We try to have a lot of our Bible studies and our presence on campus in the dorms, embedded with the college students. The only difference being we're also a local church. And my quarrel with Crew or InterVarsity, it's not a quarrel. My um, like what I advocate to any Crew or InterVarsity person is, why aren't you a church? You
Mm.
sure look like a church and behave like a church, and yet they say, well, no, 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 we're going to raise these people and bless the church. Well, what we found is that the crucial years are the post college years. In some ways, college is artificially limited in the range of your stressors or the range of your decision making. And so discipleship of college students it can be exciting, because they're so hungry to learn, and they really kind of determine the trajectory of their lives. But they're writing checks, and after graduation is when those checks come for payment. In other words, after graduation, when you're dealing with actual decisions and job and values and the idols of all kinds of lures in the world, is when that discipleship becomes the most crucial, in my opinion. And yet, a lot of the collegiate parachurches have no infrastructure or framework other than if the most zealous ones stay on a staff. And so, what we've discovered, and not by design, just by historical accident, what we've discovered is here we are, a local church, uh, believing in very similar ministry philosophy, just a different ecclesiology, with a exemplary parachurch collegiate ministries. And because of that, we just when students graduated and some of them decided to stay around, we were seeing a fruitfulness and kind of the kind of disciples that continue to live out their spiritual vows that they made uh, in their college years. And so when that continuity, I was seeing that continuity, we realized that the local church is the best way to do collegiate ministry, because college students, just because they graduate, don't change essentially in their being. And so we retain these graduates, and they have they have ownership over the church and a buy-in to the mission of the church. And so we needed to decide, what are we going to do with all of these people, because they stay and they are on fire. So of course, in the early phase of our ministry, they then got plowed right back into college ministry. But some of them were not suited for campus ministry, had different other kind of passions, but part of our church. And we believe very strongly in the lay ministry, the priesthood of all believers carried out to its, very practical conclusion. And so then we developed other ministries for our people to be engaged in, including running youth groups at other churches. And so that service that you came to, that was sort of our workers' service early in the morning on Sunday. And then we scatter to bless other churches and engage in elderly care ministry at 30 some convalescent homes just out of our church in Berkeley. And then we decided, well, we need to see this duplicated in other campuses. And so I think it was around 2006 when, out of not a very serious attempt to kind of beautify our website, we had an utterly forgettable vision statement that was comprehensive, love God, love people, something like that. And then we said, well, what is the vision uniquely that God has given us? And somebody said, from the back of the room, I still remember, an Acts 2 church in every college town. And when he shouted that out, there was silence in the room, because we recognize simultaneously that is who we are, and that is the vision God's calling us to. So starting from 2007, we started to live out that vision of planting churches in collegiate towns everywhere. And today, and I'm sorry, I don't even have the number. It's some 30 some churches serving, I think 70 or 80 college campuses. And we are planting churches. And when undergrads get fired up about the gospel, and they get deeply embedded in a group of friends, it's like dry tinder ready to get ignited. All they need is a vision, and they'll go anywhere. Because once you have lifelong friends, money isn't as appealing, or the threat and fear of not being quote unquote successful isn't as terrifying. I say, like, if you get a flat tire on a deserted road by yourself, it's a disaster. If you're there with a carload of buddies, it's an adventure and it's fun. So I can't keep up at this point. So in the middle of the pandemic, we said our college ministries back at home are going to suffer loss. We have all of these college staff. We call them staff, even though they're not paid. All this college staff. How about we send some of them out during this period? So we sent out, we'll send out a Google form. Hey, who wants to go on a church plant? Sign up. We had, I think, 1,300 people sign up, saying I'll move. So 2021, and we just finished this. We managed to send out 400 because we have to keep some,
Yeah.
We sent out 400 people. Nearly 100% of them were able to get jobs or get approval for full remote work. Mm-hmm. And this fall, everybody has moved in July now, so they're all out there. Starting from Boston, we are starting at Harvard, MIT, Tufts, Boston University, Boston College, and Northeastern, 5 campuses there. We sent a team to New York, to NYU, New York at Stony Brook, which is a little bit out of New York, mm-hmm. and then to Hoboken, New Jersey. We sent 2 teams to Philadelphia to minister to UPenn and Drexel. Drexel is a college right next to UPenn. They're actually share a border. And then down in the South, we sent a team to UVA, University of Virginia, and then Johns Hopkins in Baltimore.
Okay.
Illinois, or Purdue in Indiana, UMich in Ann Arbor, and OSU, Columbus, Ohio State. I hope I'm not missing any. So all of those teams got sent out this summer to start ministries this fall.
During the pandemic.
During the pandemic. And we didn't realize, but because of the pandemic, all the employers were willing to give remote work so that we could go to places without such a robust job market, such as Urbana-Champaign. And I can't explain this. I don't know how we did it, how I did it. It's not like me as a leader caused this to happen. I think there is a value in our culture and our ethos where our people are saying, I want to go and be part of a church planting team. It's a desire. And I'm at a point where I need to turn around and comfort those who we said, no, you should stay. We need you here. Or your season of life is such that I don't think this is going to work. Or, you have a teenager. I don't think they're going to adjust well because we can't start a youth group right away. So we've had to tell people and they feel disappointed. And I need to say, hey, come on, we have a lot to do at our home churches as well. So it's been pretty crazy. And I just feel like I'm on holy ground.
Wow. I mean, what the Lord is doing through you all is wonderful. And in many ways, it's a product of that vision that you have of everybody's on staff. I know our good friend Jeff Christopherson loves to tell the story about you inviting him out to a staff meeting. And when he got there, he was expecting just a room full of people sitting around a board table. And he comes out from behind the curtain, and it's a whole congregation of people that you considered to be your staff. Tell us a little bit more about that. I mean, that's certainly one of the unique things about Grace Point churches is that you hold very deeply to this idea that everyone is on staff.
Yeah, we do. And it it's it evolved. It's if we think about it, it's a conviction. If we think about it, I can't imagine doing it any other way. But it evolved because our church was so poor with college students. Like I said, when I first became uh, a full time minister, um, you know, my salary was $200 a month. And um, so the idea that you have to have a job, but your main passion and your calling is as a minister, like your identity. It's not like I'm a volunteer giving 2 hours to do something at church, but it's I need to, and it's not running of the church. I need to go and reach college students,
Mhm.
invite them into my life, open up my home, counsel them till midnight, 2 a.m., because college students, their clocks are so off, like midnight is early evening. And to open our refrigerators, and like that's both very intense and also very joyful. And that just became what we lived. And so, how did we get uh, almost 100% of our post college population of our church to buy into this is um, a kind of an evolutionary story. I think that's what they saw. Um, we also, um, I mean, I don't think we have a very strong teaching or polemic. Um, well, I mean, I guess we do, because I do think the clergy laity divide is very bizarre for
Mm,
Protestants to continue to maintain. It's like you study the Protestant Reformation, and
yeah.
and and then you ask people who don't know anything any better, like, okay, so what kind of churches would they have produced? It would not be the churches, like nobody would think about clergy centric audience church that we've developed. And the high church has been that way, but the community church is a seeker sensitive movement, has maybe even been more that way.
Mhm.
Ministry of the few talented to the masses. Well, in a collegiate setting, um, it provides a lot more inroads for just people who are willing to love on college students. So then the college ministry became kind of a model that our youth ministries, our elderly ministries, other ministries all sort of copy, because we want to keep kind of a similar level of devotion uh, throughout, instead of 20% of the people doing 80% of the work. And so I think once that sort of started to catch on, it just kind of perpetuates. And so today, I think we have maybe about 1,500 people system wide who identify themselves as ministers, who happen to have a day job. Now, one of the criticisms that we could receive potentially is that we regard our jobs as merely a way to um, pay rent and put food on the table. And I think that would be a justified critique. We don't have a very developed idea that your career is the way you're going to express your priesthood of all believers, or express your discipleship. Um, our uh, I think our career, the way we see career is you can glorify God at your workplace by being the best worker you can possibly be,
Hmm.
and being exemplary and allowing the workplace and even tough bosses to raise your character. But our calling is not there. Our calling is to our evangelistic and disciple making ministry. So once everybody kind of understands that, then why, how is it that everybody's doing it? Because that does seem to go contrary to the stream of culture. And I think the way that we accomplish that is that during college years, people form friendships, and college friendships are magical. Whether you're in a drunken fraternity or an amazing small group at university or at our church, it's just that those friendships get torn apart when people graduate, and they say goodbye, we'll keep in touch, but after college life becomes increasingly lonely for I think especially men, especially in America.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and when you have those friendships, then the idea that we're going to do ministry together as a group becomes just downright attractive, I think, and exciting. And then to see us raising our kids together as a common family of people, on mission together. And so it hasn't required any kind of very strong um, mechanisms or structures. It's sort of in the culture and
Hmm.
what people cherish.
Yeah, great. I mean, I think you describing that, Ed, it makes perfect sense just thinking about my own college experience and after finishing the university, really desiring to be in ministry with a group of friends, and we did that for a little while, and then we kind of separated afterwards. But yeah, it's so critical, those friendships, and what a beautiful thing that you all have done in being able to catalyze those friendships into ministry, ongoing ministry. Um, and
Yeah, and one thing. Go ahead.
no, please.
One thing about friendships, uh, I I want to be a little provocative here. Um, I think the discipleship model that is prevailing in a lot of college parachurch movements is one-on-one, and I've come to believe that that leaves so much out.
Mm,
Um, our model has become, we want our college students to be able to say, me and my friends want to be like you and your friends.
mm,
We want to be like them. Instead of one person reproducing himself with um, all that gets lost in that translation, like the bad game of telephone. Well, what I think has worked for us is a group of friends who already like really love each other, kind of hanging out with and discipling a group of younger guys. And there's something magical about friendships that is greater than the sum of the friends. It's
mm,
almost like there are the friends, and then there's this thing that they create together called friendship, this ethos and this vibe around this group that I think melts barriers and makes gospel living way more credible than a one-on-one setting. So we've really moved toward um, groups, ministering to groups, and it's not it's often not the solo leader. Even in small groups, there tends to be that good leader who can multiply that group. But we really think if you democratize it more and take the emphasis off of that charismatic leader who can do a lot, and um, but kind of, and one of our concerns is that we diminish that guy and not give that guy enough of a platform. But it's friends. And so we try to mute the differences in their gifting and really try to get them to be friends. And then I think the and then the model perpetuates because that becomes accessible to a lot of people. Even a very nerdy guy who's not a real people person, uh, like is a very vital part of that little niche. And instead of thinking, oh, ministry is not for me, it's for my friends who are more people persons, and I will just support them with my finances or something like that, they can get in there, which is why church planting teams can go out as teams. And if you look at every one of them, they might not be the sort of guys who you would think could go on a campus and strike up a conversation with a non-Christian. And yet together they form a pretty attractive, pretty compelling community. And so that's been our model.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. I love that. So you've taken from the parachurch idea of winning people to Christ, building them up in the Lord, and sending them out to continue the ministry. And you've also incorporated an international component to what you're doing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the nations are in the American universities. And so far, we have tended to be at slightly above average, more of the elite universities where the international students who come, their English level is really high. And so we found that we could minister to international students in English. And the nations are here, particularly China. And because we're actually pretty multi-ethnic at this point, the churches outside of California are about 50% non-Asian. But because our origin is Asian, we're still 50% Asian. That's way higher than the population. And so because we have an Asian face, but we are, US educated and culturally American, I think that's sort of the sweet spot for internationals to both feel comfortable enough, but not so familiar that they're willing to kind of open up a little bit in ways that they wouldn't open up to their fellow countrymen, given all of the Asian reservations. So we've been pretty successful reaching international students. But when I say international students, it's mostly maybe 70% from China. And that's the largest group at every university in America right now. And so we have international ministries at about maybe about half of the universities that we're at. We also have an international branch. And we actually have separate Sunday service and a separate campus and a separate that reaches international students.
Yeah, great. Well, wonderful. Well, Ed, as we're wrapping up here, if you were to sit down with a young seminarian thinking about church planting, what would be your advice?
Oh, that's easy. I would say plant at a college campus. I think not only I think most people think college campuses is very specialized. It's for special people. Some people have the mistaken notion, I need a PhD and I need to be a professor in order to infiltrate college campuses. Wrong. College students, okay, here's what happens on a college campus. Every fall, 1/4 of the campus shows up. They tend to be all new to town. They just show up. And for about 2 weeks, they're all trying to join something. Mm-hmm. If you're out there with love in your hearts, you're going to get some share of that. And you love them and you disciple them. They will eat more food than they will put in the offering bag. But if you can solve the finance problem for 4 years, when they graduate, you don't have to argue with them about tithing. When they graduate, you start to have not just faithful members, but co-laborers in kingdom work. And then the momentum is pretty strong. So I think that church planting in the traditional sense is 3 times as hard. It would take somebody with leadership and ministry skills at another level, unless you are sponsored and unless there's some very specific circumstances where you have a seed group that somebody's willing to send with you. But on a college campus, Cru InterVarsity, they do it all the time. 2 people show up to college campus, in a couple of years, they have a chapter full of students. They might not be hundreds, and then if that becomes a church, and every year a handful of your graduates will stay with you, couple of years, that becomes a pretty powerful team. So I would urge anybody to seriously consider starting your church planting, even if you're not going to be in college ministry for the rest of your life like I am. It's just the best place to start a church, in my opinion.
Yeah, great. And the strategic nature of it doesn't escape us either. I mean, these are places where that people will be influencers in society. And I'm sure that factors into some of the things that you all are doing.
Yeah, and I think college students nowadays, this generation, feels very lost. I think our whole world is finally experiencing the consequences that Nietzsche predicted all those years ago, where there's no up or there's no down. The earth has been unchained from its sun, and the older people have abandoned the younger has rejected the older. Men and women don't know how to be toward one another. All the sense of male honor seems so irrelevant. Everybody has abandoned everybody else, all in a quest for freedom, and the postmodern rejection of any claim to standards or authority. And I think it's left the young generation utterly bereft. And I think they feel it. They feel it to their bones. They're scared. They're anxious. They don't know what to think because they're afraid that they might say the wrong thing. So why think something? I haven't seen this amount of change in college students that I have in 30 years of ministry than the past couple of years. And I think the pandemic has only accelerated those trends. So I am looking forward to a much needier generation who are going to be hungry for the gospel, and particularly the gospel lived out in a community. And so I think now is the time, and the most needy time, for gospel preachers to show up on a college campus.
Great. Well, that's a good word of encouragement for our students, and I'm hopeful that as you've listened to what Pastor Ed has talked about in his ministry among university campuses, that this will inspire you too to consider some of the things that he's seen happen, even as you're thinking about planting churches for your ministry. Ed, thank you so much for being with us. I am so grateful for you, brother, and what the Lord has been doing through you, and just pray his special blessings on you and your work.